name is Heather McG, and this is the Happily Never After, a podcast that explores how life's endings can lead to a personal breakthrough. Because sometimes the end is just the beginning. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Happily Never After, a podcast where we explore how life's endings can lead to a new beginning. If you enjoy the show, don't forget to rate, review, and follow us wherever you are listening or watching today. My guest today is a friend of mine, and I am so happy to have her here, Dr. Nellie Tran, who grew up as the daughter of Vietnamese refugees and is now a professor at San Diego State University. Her work and passion focus on making sense of the traumas we inherit, reclaiming identity, and creating spaces where our stories matter. Her most recent project centers on reclaiming the family traumas and stories that war and migration once made unspeakable. Nellie, I am so happy as a friend to have you here because it's fun to be with you and talk to you about these things. But I'm also honored by your expertise to have you from that perspective on this show as well. So it's really a treat to have you here.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I am so excited that our worlds get to cross this way.
Yes, it's really great. Now, you have a big story to tell. There has been a lot going on in your life. You have a story that began many years and multiple generations ago, actually, related to the Vietnam War. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam United States War, which is a moment that you say your family lineage was forever changed. Can you talk about that story with us?
Yeah, as I know it, my family were born, raised, lived through the Vietnam War. My dad attempted to leave the country 3 times before he was successful, was arrested his second time, spent a year in re-education camps before he was able to escape. Luckily, I suppose that happened because he met my mom a year after that and got married. And when my mom got pregnant with me is when they decided to make their third and final attempt. And so they took a small fishing boat with 8 people out to the open ocean in the middle of the night and got far enough out where they luckily on the day that they ran out of fuel. They ran into an oil rigging ship. And luckily the UN at that point had designated that ships that picked up refugees, that country did not have to take the refugees in. And so they were allowed to drop them off at a refugee camp. And that's what this ship did, is they dropped them off at a refugee camp in Pulau Bidang, Malaysia. And that's my parents spent a couple months there and were able to come to the US under the Family Reunification Act and resettled in San Diego. And I was born 2 months later. So that's generally the story. And there's all kinds of dramatic movie-like details throughout their journey to the US.
You had quite the journey before you were even born, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's hard for me to remember that sometimes because, I call myself a second generation Vietnamese American, but it feels unfair to not get to claim some of that
Yeah.
heritage as a refugee person because, I know now, we all know now, the science tells us that women's maternal health, especially during pregnancy, affects the child. So I must have inherited many of those traumas. I mean, my mom went for days without food at times, and she certainly got very little, if any, medical care while she was pregnant with me. So she didn't get consistent care until she arrived in the US. I guess I should be grateful that, that I'm here, right? And I
Yeah,
am.
that could have gone a lot differently. A conversation that Nellie and I had before we got started was talking about the phenomenon of the Vietnamese boat people. Now, that is an actual term referring to some things that happened during that time. Can you kind of explain to everyone who has not heard that before what that means?
Yeah, so the US pulled out of the Vietnam US War in 1975. And so those are some of the iconic photos that we see of, Vietnamese people trying to get on those last helicopters and airplanes out of the country. And so at that time, my parents were in their like late high school years. And so my mom actually wasn't in school anymore, but my dad was in school at that time. And so they were fairly young. And so that first wave of Vietnamese folks came with the Americans. Most of those folks were workers. They were, working with the US, spies for the US, working with the US military. They tended to be highly educated and more privileged, but refugees nonetheless. So my parents actually came in the second wave. The second wave are boat people, tend to be folks who were not working with the US, that didn't have the same kind of connections or financial resources to be able to get out of the country. My dad's family were fishermen, so they had boats. So my dad had access to fishing boats, and he also went to school for civil engineering. And so he knew how to work a compass. And that was all you needed. So you have to remember this is like the late
My
70s,
gosh.
early 80s, right? So he knew how to build an engine for a boat. He knew how to drive a boat, a fishing boat, and he had a compass, and so he knew he had to get away from land, and that was all he knew. So boat people are folks who left the country by boat. And so you remember, as refugees, in order to apply for asylum or to become a refugee for the US, you have to leave the country that you are trying to seek refuge from. So this often gets mixed up now in today's world, because to get from Mexico to another country to seek asylum, you end up in the US where you want asylum, right? So in this case, my parents had to leave Vietnam, go some other country before they could seek asylum in a third country. And so that's how they got to Malaysia, and they had one letter from my dad's brother who was already in the US. And so they had this letter that had a money order for $75. And so that was what they used to file paperwork to say that they have family in the US, and they were able to come under the Family Unification Act. And the timing is impeccable. Like my dad had no idea what he was doing, but all of these policies were coming into place at that exact time. So he got very lucky. And the story of my family is really truly about luck, or we believe that ancestors were watching. We really believe that the grandmas who had passed during the war were making sure that this boat got to the right place, because there were so there were two couples on this boat, plus there were grandchildren on the boat. So two grandchildren plus the two women were pregnant. So four grandchildren and two sets of siblings were on the boat. So we think grandmas were watching over us and making sure that we ended up, because there's just too much luck to account for, you know?
Yeah. Well, and
Mhm.
for many of these people that were making this journey, were they, and it sounds like your parents were doing this, would they get out into the water or to the ocean and then they wouldn't actually land where they're going? They're basically getting out into the water and hoping someone picks them up. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So most people had two plans. One was, if you go out and down, then you can get to Thailand. And so
Okay.
if you go east, you're going to go to Thailand. And then the other shot was to go west and then south to try to get to Malaysia. And so because my uncle had left first, and he had a larger boat, and so he had a larger 150-person boat that he was captain of. They had gone to Thailand and were rejected by Thailand, so they were
Oh,
sent out
wow.
back to sea by Thailand, and so that they had heard about this happening, and there were more pirates that in that direction. So they're like, we have to go straight out to open seas to reduce the chance that we would hit pirates, because the pirates were notorious for stealing everything on the boats and then raping all the women. They got far enough out that they could avoid some of that. Yeah, and their
Okay.
boat was tiny, so I don't know when my dad finally showed me the size of the boat, I literally yelled at him and cursed at him, like, "How dare you? How
Yeah.
dare you take your pregnant wife and nieces and nephews onto this tiny boat into the open ocean? Like, it's ridiculous."
Yeah. It sounds terrifying. Um, Now, can you also say a little bit, because I just am assuming, because I think the US, most of our listeners are in the US, and I think the US has a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of learning world history. Can you also say a little bit about what they were fleeing? Why were they trying to leave?
So the North and South Vietnam were in a political, civil war.
Yeah.
And so there was division between the North and the South. And the Northern Vietnamese folks, the Communist Party, had moved south into the southern region, and that's where the US was. So the US had come years ago for many different reasons, but they were really promoting the army in the South. When they saw that they could not win the war, they left. So the Vietnam War has been notorious for being a war that the U.S. didn't know how to fight because, it's the tropics. It's very, very hot. It was guerrilla warfare. They had developed the napalm bombs were developed during that time to try to bomb the villages because they just literally didn't know how to fight in that region. So they weren't capable of winning, and so they fled. And when they fled, because they had lost the capital of the southern region. So at the time it was called Saigon, it's now called Ho Chi Minh City. There was no winning. They were going to lose the city, word was out, and so they had to remove their people before they were stuck. And so they left very suddenly. The wild thing is that when you go to Vietnam today, those airplanes, those tankers, they couldn't bring any of that home. It was a very sudden departure. And so they left, and the South was taken by the North. So we think of it now as the end of the Vietnam US War, and the day that Vietnam was lost. In the US, that's how it's taught in the US textbooks. But in Vietnam, it's known as Reunification Day. It was the day that the Vietnamese people got their country back. Because even before the Americans were there, Vietnam was always colonized by other countries. So the French had been there, the Portuguese had been there, the Chinese, the Japanese. So each country that came after, each country promised Vietnam that it would free free them from its previous colonizers, and each of them lied. So
Yeah.
each of
And
them
then
lied
they
and
would
took over.
colonize.
Yeah, and so each of them, it's funny because it's not funny. But it's but when you travel the country, you see remnants of the colonizers that have been there because they leave their mark, they leave their buildings, they leave their food, they leave their people, right? So it's so yeah, so the end of this war meant the end of wars in Vietnam in this large global scale, and it's one of the few countries in the world that can say it fought off its colonizers and reunified its people. Yeah.
Now, moving a little bit to the left, for you, can you talk a little bit about how trauma is passed down through generations and how
Mhm.
that's impacted you?
Yeah, I think, to tell that story, I feel like I have to tell you about how fixated I have been on my migration story and how I thought that that was what changed my life. I thought it was so pivotal. I thought that it was so pivotal to who I am and my story that I wrapped my entire career around my migration story. I literally introduced myself by calling attention to the fact that my family are refugee boat people. It has
Okay.
been it has been the iconic story of my life. When people talked about generational trauma or intergenerational trauma, I would talk about war. I would talk about how my parents passed down, the survival that they had to do during wartime. Their, they're coming to the US and having to start over, and how hard they had to work, how much they felt like they had to assimilate to what it meant to be American, the way that they wanted it so desperately. They gave me this random name of the only white person they knew. So my name is Nellie. That's my legal name. People ask me all the time what my Vietnamese name is, and I was like, they just say it with a Vietnamese tone, and it's like, but
That's a
no,
good
Nellie.
joke.
It is, but Nellie is my whole name, Nellie Tran, no middle name. My parents were like, she's going to have a simple, easy to read, easy to say, easy to write name. And that was it. I feel like that was my story. And then, this past year, I went back to Vietnam to document my family's migration because it was this iconic thing that I've wrapped my whole life around. And I've had this life goal that I would be the one that documented my family's migration story because I was so afraid that it would get lost. And that if I didn't do this, my children and all of the other nieces and nephews in the family would never have this iconic movie-worthy story. And then I went to Vietnam to do this, and I've interviewed all of my aunts and uncles and cousins who made the trip to the US. And I discovered that migration is just the most recent trauma. It wasn't even the original trauma. It wasn't, and I don't know why I didn't ever think about this. You know, I'm so deeply trained in oppression and decolonial work, and I've read all the things, but I have never thought of myself as an indigenous person,
Mm,
a person that has land, who has I participate in ancestor worship, but I never thought about the land that my ancestors literally live and sit on. When I went to Vietnam, and I've gone there many times. We always go first to pay our respects to our ancestors on the kind of where their burial sites are, kind of the family
yeah.
cemeteries. And it this past time, um, I it was my son. My son was standing on a plot of land, and my aunt shooed him off. Was like, "You're standing on an ancestor, and you need to
Boots.
move." And I was just like, "Oh, right, ancestors are on this land." I was so fixated on, here's my grandmother, my grandfather, and then my great grandparents. I was like, "Oh, look, they're my great grandparents. I've never thought about them."
Mm-hmm.
But then my eyes kinda opened up to these other plots that were in the back of the property, and it was just like this black kinda little mound, many of them, and they had these little tombstones that stuck out of the ground in what I thought at the time was Chinese lettering. So I was like, "Oh, who's that?"
Yeah.
And my aunt and uncle had to educate me that that was they don't know who it is, and was in the ancient language.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we're talking hundreds and hundreds of years ago, that prior to the Vietnamese language uses the Roman alphabet because the Portuguese brought it and the French kind of developed that. But prior to that, we had something that looked like Chinese letters. And so I thought, I was like, those are the letters I see as Chinese. Well, it turns out that we had an ancient language too. Of course we did, right? Like
Yes.
when you say it, but I didn't think of myself as someone who had history that deep and long. To me, I feel like that is the deep-seated trauma that I never saw, right? That that I have legacy, and that like that I have roots,
Yeah.
that I have literal like hundreds and hundreds, thousands of years. I asked the silly question of my my aunts and uncles. I was just like, "Well, how far back can we go?" And they just look at me like I'm the silliest little girl. They're just like, forever, like, forever. And it has not registered to me that, like, I didn't lose, right? I didn't lose by coming here. Coming to the US wasn't the pivotal moment. This is this is history repeating itself, right? We keep losing touch with our land, with our legacy. Like, that to me was the important part, that I've been fixated on this little piece of my history, and
Yeah.
then all of a sudden, I just gained an entire lineage that I conceptually understood was there, but I have not had I don't know, the privilege, or I didn't. I hadn't reached back that far. And all of a sudden, my 20 years of fixation on studying racism and anti-racism all felt so boring. And I felt like, no, this is why I knew that there was something about colonization work, decolonial work, anti-war work that was really more important to me, and I couldn't put my finger on why. And realizing that I have legacy, that I can touch the land that my ancestors stepped foot on and lay on, that colonization took this from me. And that to me, that's the trauma that repeats itself over and over again, is that it's loss. It's this abandonment. And it repeats itself in all of these psychological ways. We can call them all of these different things throughout history, because now we have psychology and we have the DSM, but back then it was just war. It was
Yeah.
just people stealing from each other, you know and loss of legacy, loss of heritage, pauses in the development and evolution of our family's lineage that should have been happening. So I feel like it all just kind of comes back to that.
Did your parents go back with you as well? I know you brought your family, like your
Yeah,
children, your husband went with you. Did your parents go with you as well on this particular trip?
they did. I wanted to. to make them rewalk the journey. So I wanted
Mhm.
them to take me to the place that they left Vietnam. And I wanted to see the place. I wanted them to point out the possible boats. We went searching for some of the people that could have helped that were living in some of the places. So we went and I wanted them to retrace it because I don't, there's so much language and cultural barriers, and there are so many hidden secrets. So I didn't know that I could trust the emotions and the stories that they told because all my life, the stories have been nonlinear and have
Yeah,
made no
sure.
sense. So
Yeah.
I was like, "You know what? To get the linear story, you're gonna walk me through it linearly."
This happened, then this
Yes.
happened.
And my parents were like, "Okay, but that's kinda weird, but sure." And it was interesting because there was a place that the boat sat, and, all the stories that went into, like, why this spot, and we had to leave in the dark of night. It had to be the night after a storm so that the kinda Coast Guard folks weren't out patrolling, and we had to have fake paperwork, and my mom had gone back to the countryside to tell her best friends that she was leaving. And when she came back, so they were all kind of coming at different points because you didn't want to get caught, right? And she got caught, but then she got caught. So she was with several, there were five of them, and there was a checkpoint that they didn't know about. So this was the checkpoint that entered the port that my dad was waiting at because my dad was an official fisherman. And so they had paperwork and they had bought fruit and food to sell at marketplace, and they had done that for several weeks to show that they are real tradesmen and fishermen. And so then my mom gets caught and they search her, and she's got the address of my uncle, my aunt and uncle in the US on her. And they had all agreed, the 5 people that were together, that we do not make eye contact, we don't know each other. And so for whatever reason, there was a change of guards at that time, and she got away. So they
Oh,
let her
wow.
go. And she thinks it might have been because she also happened to have an ID card, a work ID, because she was like a secretary in one of the government offices. And so she was trying to make up some reasons for why she was on this trip to visit people. And so she got away and she was able to take one person with her. And so they left and the others got caught because they said they didn't know each other because that was the plan. But on their trade permits, their salesman permits, they had the same address. And so their lie was broken, and so they ended up staying back in Vietnam, and my mom left. My mom was almost an entire 24 hours late to the meeting spot. And the rule was because, there's no cell phones, there's no way
Right,
to communicate with each other.
right.
The rule was the boat was going. The boat was going no matter what because they were already too far not to go. And my dad had his older brother and his entire family on the boat. That included children. So the boat was leaving because at that point, if they did not leave, they were going to jail. Like they were going to re-education camp. The children would have to be going, like it would be
Disaster.
a complete disaster. And so somehow my dad waited and waited, and he literally had they were going to allow him about 2 more hours. They're like, "We have to go, we have to go, we have to go." And my dad waited, and he saw my mom running up, and he grabbed her, and they left. And to the when we got to this port, and, my parents are surveying it. It's a functioning port today. My mom and dad do not get along. They should have gotten a divorce long ago, and they never did. But my mom said, "It's because he waited for me that day that I feel like I can never leave him."
Your mama sounds funny.
And I feel like, "Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense to me." For her to have she lost her parents at a young age and has always kinda suffered from this sense of abandonment, and the one person who literally risked life to wait for her, she
Yeah.
cannot find a way to leave him, even though she despises him today.
You'd be like, 45 years ago, I waited for you.
And he would never, like, think twice about it, right? But yeah, he waited for her and they were able to get out.
So you're a mom and you have 2 children. The process of connecting to your identity, your history, your lineage has been something that you have been working through. And your kid's sitting in even one step removed beyond that point. How do you how do you connect the dots for them? How do you approach that with the experience they have had?
Yeah. I I have really struggled with that because, I'm a pretty I pride myself on being pretty progressive and open with my children. I am a psychologist, and so, I try to be evidence-based in my training of them. So, with my oldest, and they have a 7-year gap. So I feel like I've learned a lot for the second one, but for my oldest, who's 12 now, when he was young, I always promised myself I wouldn't lie to him. And so, at that young age when they start wanting to play with guns, we
Mhm.
were hard no on guns because, and I always said, because we don't play with things that can kill people, and we don't play with toy versions of things that can kill people. And he would say, "Why?" And I believed that I should give him a real answer. And so
Yeah,
then I told him, I was like, "Because we've lost family members to guns and bombs and war, and it's not that far removed from his history." And it's true, right? For us, war is still very present. There is still, when we talk about um, aunts and uncles who have passed, we're talking about people who died from bombings in war.
yeah,
Even though it doesn't look as though we are affected by war, there's still a lot of today, there's still a lot of being triggered by imagery of war and discussions of war around the world. My parents have very strong feelings about it and are very triggered by all of the discussions and all of the sights of dead people. Like, to them, it's not just an image on the TV or on the cell phone. That it triggers them to think about, remember all the dead bodies that they have seen in their lifetime in real life,
yeah,
and dead bodies that are their family members, and all of the unresolved traumas that they have had to experience and repress in order to continue to make life for themselves and for their family. So I tell my son this, and I remember the um, in the first grade, we went to like art night at school, and there was the fourth grade project. They read a book about they read the Anne Frank book about the Holocaust, and they made artwork that was like the curtains that they had to pull at the end of the night to make sure that no light could be seen from the streets. And it it was my kid was the one who came home from that and wanted to pull all the blinds. He was afraid that people would see that there was light in the house and that we were there. And I was just like, "Oh, no, like, that was a story, it was long ago." And he was like, "Yeah, but, but on why my grandfather, he's lost his siblings to war." So he couldn't make sense of the timeline. And it had not dawned on me that for him, history is right now. He wasn't yet capable of thinking about things that happened before his life. And so everything that I had told him and everything that he was putting together is about right now. And so even as a 12-year-old now, I mean, I watch the news a lot, and I have had to be really careful about that over the years because he'll ask me, "Are we safe?" constantly. And while I want him to know about what's happening in the world, I think it's really unfair for him to live in this safe bubble we have and not feel safe, because
yeah,
I've given him the stories that are a reality, are a part of his history. And it dawns on me that it's in his blood. It's in his blood to be triggered by war, to be triggered by imagery that connotes war and loss and death. And it's really sad for me to see that happening for him, because I know it happens for me, and he's so young, but I mean, if not now, when?
well,
So,
and two, kind of as I'm listening to you talk, I think you kind of clarified some things for me, on a even bigger picture around generational trauma, coming from migration stories, but then also abuse, other kinds of things that happen in people's lives. And, and I don't have the words for it because I just thought that just connected for me about when things happen to our ancestors, whether our parents, our grandparents, going even further back. It's kind of interesting because it's important that we know about these things. It's important that we know about our history, that we know where we came from, that we know what the story of our family is. It does pull the trauma all the way through. And I'm kind of like thinking about, like, how do we process that? How do we connect to that? How do we understand it, and it's kind of the thing of life is not all good or all bad or all happy or all terrible most of the time. Sometimes it is all terrible.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
and it's just like it's just really making me think about how families work through the generations. Like I think about I don't think I've ever really talked about this on in here on my maternal side. My grandmother went through horrible domestic violence. I
Mhm.
live with that still. Like those things, like they don't stop with where it happened. Like it keeps going through the generations, and it's I don't know. It's just fascinating to me in a sad way.
Mhm.
Like this idea that we can just like fresh start with every generation is not at all
No.
realistic.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that because the way that most people talk about migration and about coming to the US in particular, it's interesting. People don't talk like this when they talk about migrating to other countries. It's really about the US and this notion of an American dream that in order to have the American dream, you have to start over, right? So when you come to the US, you are starting over. You have to be re-educated. You have to any degree that you come with doesn't count,
Yeah.
right? And that's especially true if you come as a refugee. You have to leave everything in your old country and then you come here and you start fresh, right? There's all these language around that. And what I've discovered in this process that I've been on is that for everyone that I've interviewed, for every family member I've talked to, there is no starting over. They did not they might have used that language, but they knew they weren't starting over, right? It was a pause. They were when they left the country, they knew that they had to make a they had to somehow hit the pause button so that their lineage could continue. They wanted the song to keep going, but it couldn't keep playing. They needed they needed a place to be held. And that's what I'm discovering is that their coming to the US was their holding on to what they had. Like, my dad was in school. He was one of the intellectuals of Vietnam. He just knew that the political climate would not allow him to be an intellectual in Vietnam. And I'm an intellectual now, you
Yes.
know? So
That's
I feel like
interesting.
yeah, and it's not that I lived out his legacy, it's that he hit the pause button so that I could continue what our family was meant to do. I could not have done this had he not hit the pause button. It didn't need to be the US. It could have been Australia, it could have been France, it could have been Canada. Those are other places that we have family members that they sought refuge in other countries. But what we are passed down with through the generations, whether it be trauma or whether it be, skills and resiliency, if we choose not to do anything with it, it's not because we rejected it. It's on hold. It's on hold until we can. And I think that that's what happened. I could not I did not have the capacity. I could not acknowledge what my family lineage had been through. I wasn't ready. I needed to see oppression in the US. I had to understand myself as situated in the US before I could move beyond that, before I could understand the worldliness, the global destruction that had happened, I needed to understand it on a smaller scale. And so to have inundated myself with work around oppression on a smaller scale, which is anti-racism work, that is small peanuts when you start thinking about anti-racism work and then you start talking about colonization, right? Like they go hand in hand for sure. But globalization and us thinking about the world, we all have indigeneity somewhere that has been taken from us somehow. There's a lot of trauma around migration that we all have experienced in our legacies. And I constantly push my students to think about how do you return to that? It's on pause. If you want it, you don't need to hang on to mine. People love my family's migration story, and people love mindfulness from Thich Nhat Hanh, which is also a concept that he developed because of colonization to try to save his people. You don't need to hang on to our concepts from our country, right?
Yeah.
Your legacies have a pause of their own that needs to be picked up and uncovered.
Now, in the process of uncovering, I think, well, maybe I'm on the slow path. I'm not sure. But I know for me, it has taken decades for me
Uh,
to both. have even a basic understanding of where I came from. And, and we have different histories, like for me, understanding history of abuse, history of, patriarchy and all of those things was just showing up in my life. And it's taking me a very long time to recover from fundamentalism and all of those things.
Mhm.
For you and your story, when you think back to maybe when you were in your 20s and the journey you've been on since then, what is there anything that you wish you would have understood at a younger age, or how has your understanding of yourself changed over time?
You know, I thought some of the things that I really struggled with when I was young, I still struggle with. Who am I kidding? Um, I I had this language that I carried with me into my 20s as I was starting my career around needing to make it, to make sure that my parents' sacrifice and struggles were worth it. And so I needed to be enough so that their sacrifices were worth it. And it wasn't just my parents' sacrifice. They left my older half brother in Vietnam because bringing children on a trip where you weren't sure you were going to live is irresponsible, right? So
Yeah.
my older brother is now in the U.S. with us, and I feel as though I have to make it up for him too. I took his mom away from him so that I could have a future. I really lived under this feeling of indebtedness. I owe my parents, I owe my brother something. And all I have to give to show my worthiness is success. And the uncomfortable part of that reality for me now as a 43-year-old is that I define success so narrowly, that I define success in the American US way. And but I was also indebted and understanding sacrifice in a Vietnamese way. So meshed together, this all created a mess for me. And I wish I knew that me being alive and happy is part of what they wanted for me. They wanted freedom, freedom of choice. They might not have been able to articulate that in English so that I could understand it, but they were running away from a country where they had no freedom of choice. They had no access to resources and paths. The path would have been laid out in front of me. I could not have chosen a future for myself. I could not have chosen a future that included, a husband from a different country or, a children and a family where we had an egalitarian household. Like these were not choices that were possible. And I know now that whatever I choose with freedom. When I come back to Vietnam, and I've been thinking a lot about whether home is here or home is Vietnam, I deserve access to both. I am a US citizen, but my heritage to Vietnam was taken from me. So I am worthy because I am, and I know I should know that now. I still work on it every day to really feel it, but I know now that what my family wanted for me was freedom. Freedom of mind, freedom of choice, and my feeling of worthlessness, that was from generations and generations of colonization telling me that my people are not good enough. That's not my family. They say it, but I know that they got it from generations before them.
Yeah.
They want us to make it because they have a narrow definition of what success might look like because of having come to the US. So I know that now.
Now, I think this is something that is really timely at this moment, taking the bigger bird's eye view at a societal level. There's a lot going on, especially now in the conversation and actions around immigration and migration. What are some of, especially in today's environment, do you have any thoughts on what people can do to be more supportive of their community? What are things that we can actually do to make a positive impact on our neighbors and the community around us, knowing everything that's going on right now?
Can I tell you a story to answer that? So one of the things that I discovered in Vietnam when I went back is that no one was people hid this story from me because they thought that coming to the US that I would get in trouble. My family would get in trouble if people knew that I had family members who fought with the North, the communists. So it turns out I have family members all in the same kind of family unit, siblings who fought for the North and for the South simultaneously. And on the weekends, they came home and partied together. And I was shocked. I was just like, what are you talking about? Like politically, does that work? And it really reminded me of today. It reminded me of our families that argue on the weekends about our politics, except they didn't argue about their politics. They did what they had to do during the weekend. They came home and they partied with each other as family because they said that's what we just had to do is, we had to do this thing that, fight this war, but we're family. And they would come home and they would care for each other. I'm sure that they had some bickering over beers, but generally I feel like that's what we have forgotten to do, right? That what they told me that I really carry with me now, and I've really thought about this, is that war is fought on behalf of powerful men. People die for the goals that powerful men lay out for them. They are not the goals of the farmers and of the people who are often made to fight the wars. That's what happened in my family. The soldiers had to fight, it was a rule. You had to go and fight by a certain age. But they were farmers. They didn't care. They just wanted their children to survive, and they wanted to drink their beers on the weekend together. We have to take care of each other because the men who are out there preaching all of the politics and who say they have these goals, they're not the ones putting their bodies on their line. No matter what side you are in a war, there's only one reality in war. People are going to die. There is no other truth in war. That is the one certainty of it. And the people who are fighting it just want to live. And I think that that's what we have forgotten, that there is this political war that's happening. We still have to care about each other. Whatever those big goals are, we still have our goals to maintain our communities, to raise our children, to drink our beers together on the weekend, to be able to laugh at stuff. And I know that the pause that my family had to take, we can't we can't pause again to fight like this. Those are not our goals. The goal for the family was freedom, right? And to stay together. So that's my encouragement. There is no trash in this world. We have to all see each other as worthy of life. I don't always feel that we see each other as fellow humans, that we treat each other with the dignity we all deserve, and that we trust and believe in each other's pain. Like, there's a lot of people who are hurt right now, who don't feel seen, who don't feel supported. And I really believe that our world would be better if we just could make eye contact with each other and could show up for each other. If we could see each other's pain, we would love each other better.
What do you wish more people understood about immigration and migration?
I wish people would understand that no one wants to leave home unless they have to. No one wants to leave their family. No one wants to leave their literal ancestral lands. That when the time comes, you have to leave for the sake of your family, for the sake of your livelihood, and you're in search of livelihood and freedom. I just wish people understood how dire things have to be. If you really think about it now, I think a lot of my close circles now have been talking about what is your signal to leave. I think
Yeah,
that's the reality of some of the folks that I'm in community with is when do you know to leave this country? And if you say when the first bomb falls, those of us who are closer to war know you've waited too long, it's over.
yeah.
And that's that type of conversation where when you start having to have that conversation, that's what it's years of that conversation. It's years of desperation.
Right.
It's many, many attempts to try to find a path to freedom, to something that feels safe. It's not so simple.
In life, with all of these experiences you've had and getting to know your family history, connecting to your lineage, and thinking about all of it in life, what do you know for sure?
I know I don't know anything. What do I know for sure? I saw this question and I was like, I don't know anything. What do I know for sure? I know that we are all linked together through our pain and suffering. That's where that's that's what makes us human, and that's how we find joy and connection. And it is the thing that will connect us if we can open ourselves up to feeling and being with each other in our pain and suffering. I think I know that.
I've had this conversation with a few people lately, and it's really left a big impact on me. that healing happens in community. It's less
Mhm,
likely to happen by yourself. It happens in community. And when you're brave enough to talk about pain and suffering,
mhm.
that actually does create connections and, in a safe environment. That's really where how you get to the joyful side. That's how you get over there. That's how you heal because just putting it to the side and trying to ignore it, we know that doesn't work. And so that has been something I think that for me, and I had some conversations with other people about this as well, that journey to healing is communal. And it's about talking about the real things that have happened and to tell the truth, even if it's hard to say out loud. But that's how you get there for a
You
lot of
know,
people.
I I have to have this second conversation with my mom about her family traumas. And I've been talking for weeks now with my therapist about how to have this conversation. And I keep thinking that it's her pain and her story. And what I've come to understand or have been taught and trying to understand is that it's my story too, right?
Yeah.
That's my grandma. It's in my legacy. It's mine as well. And that the reason why I won't have the conversation, because I certainly can, right? Is because it will bring up so much pain for both of us. And we will be more connected in that suffering and in that pain. And I can't handle the thought of being that connected to my mom, who I have a difficult relationship with. And that to me, that's where I know that our truths, when we can accept the truths in our suffering and our pain, and it allows us to open up and to connect in ways that have not been able to. But it's also the scariest thing because to connect with people that we have hurt feelings with, that's a whole 'nother thing. And can you
Yeah.
imagine what that would do for our country if we were able to see each other's pain and connect through that despite simultaneously having done awful things or said awful things about each other? I think we're afraid of it. I think it requires a certain amount of sturdiness that so many of us have not had the opportunity to build or just don't have.
Yeah, like, we don't know how to do it in a lot of cases. I think too, and I'm still walking through this as well. I think too, it just sometimes it takes a lot of time. Like, I know for me, I've
Mm.
been doing a lot of writing lately about things that have happened in my life, and I actually had to put it away for a bit because I realized I'm not ready to do that. I thought I was, but I'm not. And I think sometimes that's the experience a lot of people have, and it's a series of steps. Like it's not an easy, do this and voila, everything's fixed. Like it takes a lot of time and it takes multiple steps and you have to be patient with yourself. And it is actually really hard work that I think most of us are not equipped to handle well.
No, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but, as I've started to attempt to talk about it, write about it, there's a lot of tears that feel like they need to be shed, and I sometimes feel like the tears are mine, and then on other days, I feel like this is someone else's tears, but it feels like there are generations of tears that have not been shed, and every time I allow those tears to be shed, then the next time I talk about it or write about it, it feels a little lighter, but then I'm at work, and I don't have time, I don't have space to shed so
Yeah.
many tears, and
Right.
I
I
don't
got to
have
keep it together at this moment.
yeah, and I keep telling people I feel bad about doing, an autoethnography as part of my professional work, and now I'm realizing, no, this is so much harder than any of the other papers I've ever written for any prestigious whatever.
Yeah.
The personal work is this is what people have been avoiding. It's not that it lacks scientific rigor, it's that it's harder. You have to
Yes.
have so much more clarity and you have to process so much more to be able to bring light to a truth that quite frankly you don't know that you know is true. But I
Right.
think that's the point is can you be certain enough about something that lacks so much clarity? Because we're certainly as scientists writing as though we are so certain about
Yeah.
things that lack so much, certainty because it's not personal.
Yeah, I actually just last night, I'm in a writing group where we are all working on some memoir based work.
Mm.
And I just told the group, I was like, I'm in hell right now. I'm in writer's hell because I don't know where to go. I know there's a lot in here, but I cannot like put a shape to it. I'm really struggling with it. And the person who like is guiding the group, she was like, it's not hell. This is actually what it is. She was like, if you're actually doing actual work, if it's
Mhm.
easy, you're not really doing it. And she said it is actually supposed to be horrifyingly difficult for a while. I thought that was
Yeah.
helpful. And I think that applies to healing too. It's supposed to
Yes.
be hard.
If it's not messy, you're not getting your money's worth. I
Yeah.
say all this stuff to my students all the time, and it's hard to listen to your own advice, you know? It's not supposed to be easy. It's not supposed to be pretty. It's a privilege to be messy. I don't know. I say all these things to myself. I still don't want to do it.
Yeah. We got to say it to ourselves.
Like, this is part of the process. You have to walk through this. And the other thing I keep telling myself is, if the journey is this long and you've gone, it's not linear, right? So you're going to go back and forth. But the problem for me is that if you go a little bit and you reject the process and run back, then you have to repeat all of that again before you can move forward.
Nobody
And
wants
I
to
keep
do that.
right, no one wants to do that. You don't want to start the marathon over and then repeat the first 5 miles. So I keep telling myself, just push 30 more minutes. You have to push a little bit longer because then you'll get stronger, right? And
Yeah.
emotional stamina is so hard to build.
Oh, I like that phrase. I'm going to
Yeah.
start thinking about that. That's a
Yeah.
that's a really good phrase. Emotional stamina.
Yeah. When we train counselors, we train them to be able to deal with high emotions or sit with high emotion for 8, 9 hours at a time and still stay focused and engaged and still ask good questions. And it's hard. It's really hard to do that. So remember, you are building a muscle.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Nellie. It has been a treat. And thank you for sharing your story. I know these things can be challenging to talk about, like we just mentioned. Where can people find you if they want to work with you or hear more from you?
They can look on my website, nellietran.com. I'm also on social media, so I create content for the work that I publish and the mentoring work that I do with students. So you can find me on TikTok is my main platform at Dr. Nellie, and I'm also on Instagram at Dr. Nellie Tran.
Wow, that's amazing that you got Dr. Nellie on TikTok.
Early adapters.
Good job.